Welcome back. You night owls tonight. We travel back to a time when castles rose from the mist, torches crackled in stone corridors, and absolutely no one had minty fresh breath. Imagine the year is 1214. It's dawn, and the sun is just beginning to pry open the day over a muddy English village. A rooster crows somewhere offbeat, and a peasant named Wolf stretches beside his straw mattress. His teeth? They feel fuzzy, gritty, and slightly suspicious. His solution isn't a toothbrush, because those don't exist. Not yet. No. Wolf reaches for a stick maybe, a hazel twig he's chewed one end of, until it's frayed. His great-grandmother swore by it. He shoves the splintered tip between his teeth and starts scrubbing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world Wolf inhabits smells of wood smoke, damp wool, and let's be honest, quite a bit of unwashed humanity. Yet, tooth care, believe it or not, does exist. Not in a Colgate and floss sort of way, but in the form of habits, traditions, and half-remembered wisdoms passed down through generations, like an heirloom stew recipe. Let's start with the basics. The humble tooth twig, also known later by its Arabic name, miswak. In medieval Europe, this twig is often just that, a piece of wood from certain trees, chewed until the fibers flare into a brush-like fringe. Hazelnut, willow, or ash are favored for their texture and medicinal properties. People across classes would gnaw on them, working out the food remnants, and occasionally bleeding a little. Just a bit of pink in the spit and totally normal, right? Even the lowest peasant knows that bad teeth lead to pain, and pain is expensive. There are no dental plans, no cherry-flavored numbing gel, just a one-eyed man with rusty pliers named Godric the Yanker. So folk do what they can. Salt is a favorite. Sprinkle a little on the end of the twig, and you've got a rudimentary abrasive paste. Rub that along the gums and teeth, and it gives you that fresh from the seaside sting. Charcoal burned sticks ground into powderis, another. It's gritty and black, but scrubs surprisingly well. Some even mix it with animal fat, creating a sort of prehistoric toothpaste/death wish. And then there's the technique. It's not just scrubbing. Some folks believe in chanting while cleaning, maybe to time the effort, maybe to ward off tooth demons. One popular rhyme in early Germanic regions loosely translates to scrub left, scrub right, keep the black rot from my bite. Delightful. But of course, not everyone is so diligent. Many peasants only clean when their teeth ache, and when they do, they go full herbalist. Sage leaves, mint, and even a dab of honey, mixed with crushed oyster shell, these were applied to the teeth in hopes of soothing the pain and sweetening breath. It doesn't always work. Sometimes, it just feeds whatever bacteria is throwing the tooth tantrum in the first place. Still, let's not forget that most people in these times eat less sugar than we do today. Their diet's grains, porridge, tough meat, and boiled roots are often fibrous and low in refined carbohydrates. That means fewer cavities. So ironically, while their breath might be compared to a barnyard breeze, their teeth, when not chipped or worn down, can remain surprisingly intact. But then there are the fringe folks, the ones who think spiders can help. Yes, somewhere in the Scottish Highlands, a woman wraps a spider in a linen pouch and ties it around her neck, believing it will draw out the tooth demon through sympathetic magic. A fringe idea? Sure, but that's medieval science if. It hurts, and you can't see it. It's probably mystical. Historians still argue whether such amulets were common practice or just regional quirks. Some say they were widespread across northern Europe. Others insist they were the invention of frightened mothers, hoping to soothe a screaming child by any means necessary. And then there's the issue of breath. Medieval folk know a stinky mouth when they smell one. So, they chew herbs. Parsley, rosemary, and cloves are favourites pungent enough to mask just about anything. There are even recorded instances of people stuffing their mouths with lavender before bed to banish night, spirits, and morning fume. Try that instead of mouthwash tonight. But brushing isn't a private act in this world. Often, it's social. Picture a young woman standing by a well, scrubbing her teeth with a mint-smeared twig, exchanging recipes for clove tea with her neighbour who's holding a bundle of sage. There's laughter, shared misery, and the occasional wince when someone strikes a sore tooth. Meanwhile, in the manor houses of the better fed, young noblemen dab linen cloths in vinegar and scrub their teeth ceremoniously, as if daring them to rot. Some use wine, because why not? If you're going to rinse your mouth, may as well get a buzz. One rather pretentious noble reportedly commissioned a silver toothpick with his initials engraved, which he used flamboyantly at feasts. Subtlety wasn't a thing. Speaking of toothpicks, they're practically fashion statements. Made from bone, ivory, even brass, they're hung on chains or tucked in embroidered pouches. It's not uncommon to see a man idly cleaning his teeth with a gold pin while chatting about the weatherer, his rival's latest syphilitic scandal. But let's circle back to the majority. The peasants. They don't have gold pins. They have fingernails and twigs and ashes from last night's fire. Now imagine a family before dawn, huddled around an iron stove. The father rakes out warm ash, pinches some between his thumb and forefinger, and offers it to each child. "Rub it on and don't swallow," he grunts. The children obey, grimacing at the gritty texture and salty, bitter taste. They've done this every day for as long as they can remember, and so the cycle continues. Occasionally, someone innovates. A travelling tinker shares news of a special polish made in the city of Parisa, mix of burnt staghorn and vinegar. It promises whitening power beyond belief. The villagers are skeptical. One woman buys a small jar, tries it, and declares it spicy as the devil's foot, which may or may not be a compliment. Still, the idea spreads. Recipes begin to evolve. People add sage, salt, even crushed seashells to their concoctions. One enterprising farmer mixes soap with beer and lemon peel, calls it tooth ale, and attempts to sell it at market. It's a hit for 1 week. Then someone vomits, and it's never mentioned again. Let's not forget the role of oral hygiene in romance. Bad breath is a deal breaker. Even in the 13th century, there are love poems cautioning suitors to chew mint before courting. One troubadour writes that a lady's beauty is dimmed by the dragon's sigh that slips her lips. Ouch. So yes, even in a time of mud huts and bubonic peril, people care sometimes deeply about their smiles. And yet, for all this effort, most medieval mouths still end up with gaps, chips, and the occasional screaming rot. That's just the way of things. Life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40, and many don't make it that far. But those who do are often toothless, their gums receded, their jaws sunken. It's not unusual for an older man to survive without a single tooth, sipping broth and gnawing boiled vegetables, with more determination than bite. Still, perhaps the most comforting thought in all this: no one's judging, Everyone smells a little. Everyone's missing a molar or two. And so Wolf, our scruffy peasant from earlier, finishes his morning cleaning with a spit into the dirt, pockets his twig, and goes about his day. Somewhere, a noble does the same with a scented cloth and a smug smile. Somewhere else, a monk quietly rinses his mouth with wine. And overhead, the sun continues its slow, golden climb witness to another day of dental ingenuity, charcoal smiles, and surprisingly dedicated oral care. Wolf's twig dangles behind his ear as he trudges toward the village field. The crisp morning air, already carrying the smoke of hearth fires and the scent of damp hay. Around him, other villagers are beginning their own silent routines. A mother wipes her toddler's nose with her sleeve. A boy stomps at a puddle with glee. And somewhere nearby, a huddle of monks whispers their morning prayers. In a monastery not far from Wolf's village, stone-walled, ivy-wrapped, with a heavy wooden door that creaks like an old man's knees, a group of Benedictine monks finishes their pre-dawn matins. Their lives are dedicated to repetition and ritual. 7 daily prayer services, hours of script copying, and small-scale herb farming. In this cloistered world, there is a surprising attention to the body, though not out of vanity. Cleanliness, they believe, is next to godliness, or, at the very least, next to not being miserable. Tooth cleaning here is a quiet, contemplative act. Each monk keeps a small bundle of dried mint leaves, sage, and myrrh in his personal effects wrapped in cloth, tucked under a wooden comb, beside his prayer beads. Every morning, after washing his face with cold water from a stone basin, he selects a few leaves and chews them slowly, almost prayerfully. It's not just hygiene, it's an act of spiritual purification. Sage, with its sharp, slightly peppery edge, is believed to purify both breath and soul. Myrrh, brought in via trade routes from the Eastis, valued for its resinous quality and preservative power. Mint, of course, is the medieval version of a breath strip. Together, they form what some monks call the holy breath, which feels like a medieval breath mint, but sounds like something you'd see on a Renaissance-era perfume ad. A monk named Brother Oswald, known for his surprisingly nice teeth and for falling asleep during Vespers, swears by a paste he prepares in secret. He mashes mint leaves, adds a few drops of sheep's tallow, and mixes it with crushed oyster shell. He dabs this paste on a scrap of linen and rubs it along his teeth in slow, circular motions. His fellow monks eye him with suspicion. Anything that smells this pleasant surely flirts with vanity. But they say nothing. They've all asked for a sample at one point. Historians still argue whether monastic dental care was truly common, or whether these routines were regional luxuries, limited to wealthier or more connected abbeys. Some say monks were paragons of hygiene. Others say they were just less likely to have their teeth knocked out in a bar fight. Both are probably true. Interestingly, medieval monasteries often had their own herb gardens. Rows of chamomile, sage, fennel, and hyssop grow beside cabbage and leeks. The herbs serve many purposes, flavoring bland stews, treating wounds, calming nerves. But several are also used for oral care. Fennel seeds, chewed after meals, are thought to aid digestion and freshen the breath. Hyssop, bitter and cleansing, is used as a rinse. Notably, these gardens also produce soapwort, a plant that, when crushed and mixed with water, lathers into a mild cleanser. Some monks use this to wash their faces and on special feast day 7 their mouths. It's a far cry from fluoride toothpaste, but for its time, it's impressively forward-thinking. Elsewhere in the monastery, an elderly monk who has lost most of his teeth sits beside a fireplace, humming a hymn and mashing boiled turnips with his gums. He pauses to suck on a clove knot for flavor, but to numb the ever-present ache in his jaw. Cloves, imported from the East through complex trade routes, are both precious and practical. They contain eugenol, a natural anesthetic. Even without knowing the science, people recognize that chewing a clove brings relief. It's a staple in many medieval mouths, tucked between cheek and molar, like a spicy secret. Sometimes the monks prepare tooth powders. These are dry mixtures made from powdered herbs, burned bones, and even dried, crushed rose petals. They're stored in tiny ceramic jars, labeled in Latin and used sparingly. A pinch of powder is placed on the fingertip or a small cloth and rubbed along the teeth. It's abrasive, but effective. And since these powders often smell like incense and old wood, they leave the breath somewhat less fearsome. Yet not all monastic dental practice is gentle. Some records tell of penitential mouth rinses, where a monk might be instructed to rinse with brine or vinegar as a form of penance for impure thoughts. Picture that. A spiritual cleanse that also kills 99% of the bacteria in your mouth. Who knew divine punishment came with bonus hygiene? Of course, medieval understanding of germs is non-existent. There are no microbes in their lexicon. Disease, to them, is the result of sin, miasma, bad air, or imbalance of the four humours. But monks are meticulous. Their daily rhythms demand order, and that order trickles down to their bodies. Unlike Wolf's haphazard twig scrubbing, the monk's regimen is consistent, reverent. Still, life in the abbey is not always peaceful. When plague or famine strikes, monks are often the ones tending to the sick, and with that comes exposure. Many monks lose their teeth not to rot, but to malnutrition. Without proper nutrition, especially vitamin C, which they don't yet understand, gums recede, teeth loosen, and jaws ache. Scurvy wasn't exclusive to sailors. But despite these hardships, monastic communities record some of the earliest examples of written hygiene instructions. Scrolls preserved in libraries detail mixtures for breath powders, descriptions of tooth pain remedies, and even recommendations on how often to rinse one's mouth often, right after morning prayer and before the midday meal. One delightfully specific text, tucked into the margin of a 13th century herbal manuscript, suggests, to cleanse the mouth and sweeten the breath, let one chew fennel root steeped in goat milk. And if the root be old, add vinegar and speak no lies for 3 days. A trifecta of dental, digestive, and moral care. In cities, monks' influence spreads. Lay people hear tales of monastic purity and begin to imitate. Apothecaries start selling monk's powder, usually a random blend of herbs with a fancy label. Merchants peddle linen packets of Abbott's breath balm, guaranteed to banish rot and encourage closeness. We can only imagine how many sold by sheer virtue of not smelling like fish guts. Still, the line between sacred care and secular imitation is blurry. A young scribe, eager to emulate his mentors, begins brushing twice daily with rosemary ash. A nun instructs her pupils to gargle with cold chamomile tea. Slowly, across Europe, the idea that teeth deserve daily attention begins to take hold, even if that attention is filtered through scripture and superstition. And then, occasionally, something unexpected happens. A monk stumbles across an old Roman text, recopied over centuries, describing the dental habits of ancient philosophers. One such fragment, attributed, perhaps questionably, to Pliny the Elder, recommends rubbing the teeth with crushed mouse skull, dried in the sun, for firm white enamel. Whether the monk tries it is unknown, but you can bet someone did. This blending of pagan, Roman, and Christian knowledge is typical of the medieval world. Nothing is discarded, just adapted. So if a remedy involves frankincense, it's blessed. If it involves blood, maybe also blessed. If it works, divine. If it doesn't, probably your fault. Still, in these cloisters, a quiet revolution is underway. Not one of war or politics, but of ritual. A morning routine, however crude, starts to resemble something timeless. Splash of water, brush of teeth, pause for breath, whisper of prayer. And that brings us back to Wolf, now returning from the fields, sweaty and sun-kissed. His twig is still tucked behind his ear. As he enters the village square, he passes a friar, offering prayers in exchange for bread. The friar smiles, revealing a set of surprisingly white teeth. Wolf narrows his eyes. "What leaf you chew, father?" he asks. The friar laughs. "Mint and myrrh. Try it. Good for the soul." Wolf takes the offered sprig, sniffs it, and shrugs. As he pops it into his mouth and begins to chew, a strange sensation tingles along his tongue cool, sharp and vaguely clean. He isn't sure if his teeth feel any better, but his breath suddenly smells less like old cheese and more like something divine. And so, monk and peasant alike, bound not by wealth but by need, continue their quiet battle against rot and ruin. With twigs, herbs, cloth, and prayer, they wage a daily war against the ever-present threat of the toothache. They don't always win, but they try, and maybe that's what matters most. Sunlight gleams off the stained glass windows of a cathedral as morning breaks over a walled city. Cobblestones are still wet from a night's rain, and the streets begin to hum with the early shuffles of servants, merchants, and nobles. Behind one tall iron gate crested with lions, of courser young lady of court lounges on a cushioned bench, holding a silver mirror and frowning ever so slightly at her reflection. Her teeth, they aren't terrible, just not court perfect. And in this world of courtly love, troubadours, and endless performance, your teeth are more than your own. They're public theatre. So she calls for her maid, and her maid knows the drill. A tray arrives. On it, powdered coral, vinegar, a cloth soaked in rosewater, a small silver scraper, and a little velvet pouch filled with cloves. The ritual begins. Welcome to the aristocratic war on halitosis, where appearance matters more than health, and a smile is both armor and artifice. For nobles, teeth are as political as they are personal. A white smile speaks of breeding, wealth, and access to expensive imports. Never mind that those same imports might be the very thing destroying those pearly whites. Case in point? Sugar. Ah yes, sweet, seductive sugar. By the 13th century, it's trickling into Europe through trade routes, a luxury that only the very rich can afford. It's used sparingly at first in pastries, spiced wine, and medicinal syrups, but it quickly becomes a sign of power and indulgence and tooth decay. Historians still argue whether medieval nobility understood the connection between sugar and cavities. Some claim they suspected, especially when their molars crumbled by 30. Others suggest they were in denial, too dazzled by the flavor. What's certain is that sugar began to leave its mark literally on aristocratic smiles. But nobles don't suffer quietly. They fight back with their best weapons, vanity and servants. Tooth scrapers become a staple of the noblewoman's toilette. These fine instruments often silver, occasionally bone, or ivoria, used to gently rake plaque from the surface of the teeth. The scraping sound, not unlike a fork on porcelain. The effect? Surprisingly good, if not overly enthusiastic. Some users go too hard, scraping enamel along with grime, but that's a problem for future them. Tooth powders are also a hot commodity. Recipes vary by region. but common ingredients include burnt eggshell, crushed pearls, powdered bone, alum, and, of course, coral. The coral is pulverized into a delicate pink dust, more often seen in cosmetics than hygiene. But aristocrats believe it strengthens teeth. One French countess insists on coral and cinnamon paste, applied every morning by her maid. Her husband, it is whispered, cannot stand her breath, but dares not say so. That would be vulgar. And what of men? Well, noblemen aren't above vanity either, especially at court. Consider Sir Alaric of Lancaster, who carries a polished hornpick in his belt and is known to floss with horsehair. He considers it an act of chivalry to attend to his teeth before every duel, feast, or poetry reading. A clean mouth is a clean conscience, he tells his squire, while gargling a mouthful of wine and spitting it at a tapestry. Romantic, no? To be fair, alcohol, particularly wine or strong spirits, is often used as a mouth rinse. Not only does it numb pain, but it masks odours and kills some bacteria. In Italy, young nobles swish grappa infused with rosemary. In France, it's claret with lavender. Is it hygienic? Sort of. Is it indulgent? Absolutely. But nothing, and we mean nothing, beats the noble obsession with cloves. Tiny, fragrant, and astonishingly powerful, cloves are the medieval equivalent of breath mints. Wealthy women keep them in pouches, boxes, and even wear them in jewellery, hollow rings filled with clove oil to discreetly dab on the tongue. Men chew them before negotiations or seductions. Some even believe cloves can prevent toothaches if held in the mouth overnight. At court, giving someone a clove is a flirtation. Receiving one is a signal. Gossip often includes such juicy tidbits as, Lady Isolde accepted a clove from Lord Bertrand. He must be welcome at her table, and perhaps her chambers. Scandalous. And the remedies don't stop there. Exotic ingredients flood the hygiene scene. Powdered ambergris, yes, whale vomit, is prized for its scent and used in early breath pastes. Crushed emeralds, seriously, are sometimes added for their supposed healing energy. This is less hygiene and more alchemy meets beauty pageant, but it's par for the course in a world where nobles spend as much on their teeth as on their horses. Let's talk about noble children. When a young noble's first tooth appears, it's cause for celebration and concern. Parents rush to ensure their heir's mouth is properly cared for. Nurses are instructed to rub the gums with honey and ashes. Amulets are hung to encourage straight growth. A common one features a tooth-shaped charm with an engraving of St. Apollonia, the patron saint of toothaches. Bless her fiery martyrdom, but even she might raise an eyebrow at the sheer superstition at play. And when that first baby tooth falls out, it's not tucked under pillows. It's thrown into the fire or buried in the garden with a whispered wish for strong adult teeth. Sometimes it's handed to the local priest for blessing. Sometimes it's hidden in a locked box to bind the child's spirit, which sounds way creepier than it needs to. Back in the drawing rooms of noble estates, older family members share stories of dental disasters. One elderly duchess, now completely toothless, recalls her days of scrubbing with lemon peel and vinegar. "Made my teeth shine like the king's armour," she says, "then fall out like battlefield arrows." She chuckles, gumming a spoonful of sweetened porridge, and declares it a worthy trade. And yet, despite all these rituals, the rot persists. Servants whisper of lords who can't sleep from the pain. Nobles sneak herbs into their mouths during mass to hide the smell of decay. Some even have teeth removed in secret, by moonlight, in stables, with only wine for comfort, so their public image remains unblemished. No one wants to admit to weakness, especially not a rotten molar. One curious and somewhat tragic trend among the rich is to mask the problem with cosmetics. Think early dental deception. Women apply white lead paint to their lips and cheeks to appear youthful. They hold scented fans before their mouths when speaking, to hide both scent and shape. And in some portraits, mouths are shown closed tightly, less an artistic choice and more a cover-up. Historians still debate whether this tight-lipped fashion was stylistic or strategic. One school argues it was modesty. The other says, pure rotten insecurity. Let's not forget court physicians. These high-status healers offer a mix of knowledge, nonsense, and well-meaning poison. Some prescribe rinses made of goat urine and rosemary. Others suggest chewing dried lizard skin to heat the jaw. A favourite among Spanish courts? Vinegar and crushed oyster shell paste, applied with a feather. Delicate, fragrant, and slightly abrasive enough to ruin enamel after 3 uses. There are even attempts at early fillings. When a cavity opens, some desperate souls plug it with beeswax, honey-soaked cloth, or powdered herbs mixed with pitch. These temporary fixes sometimes help. Other times they become infected. But they're easier than facing the medieval version of a root canal. Total tooth extraction with a heated iron hook. We're not even joking. Which brings us to a nobleman's final recourse, gold. If your tooth is bad, but visible, you don't always yank it. Sometimes you decorate it. Gold caps, while not common, are not entirely unheard of. More likely, though, a damaged front tooth gets painted white with chalk and wax, carefully maintained for banquets and public appearances. Smile sparingly, speak eloquently, and never let anyone get too close. Because close, dear listener, is dangerous. They might smell the truth. And yet, for all their flaws, these nobles pioneer something important. The idea that daily tooth care matters. Whether through fear of embarrassment, desire for beauty, or pure ritual, they create routines that, while not perfect, lay the groundwork for more modern habits. So when Lady Rosalind stares into her silver mirror and scowls at her crooked incisor, she's not just indulging in vanity. She's participating in a long, strange tradition of trying to master one's mouth, one clove at a time. She dabs her cloth in the coral powder, opens her lips and begins to polish. It stings. It always stings. But when the clove comes next, and the rose water last, she smiles. A careful, practiced smile, and thinks, that will do. And for tonight, it will. The rain settles into a steady mist as twilight descends over Wolf's village. Smoke curls upward from hearths and thatched rooftops. A dog barks lazily near the baker's cottage. In the fields, the last labourers shuffle home, heavy with fatigue and mud-caked boots. But behind closed doors, another daily ritual unfolds. One that doesn't involve saints or silver mirrors, but soot, salt, and the sharp-tongued wisdom of village wives. Inside a one-room home, dimly lit by a single candle stub and the red glow of the hearth, a woman named Maud crouches beside a bucket of ashes. Her fingers are nimble, calloused from years of spinning flax, and stained at the edges with herbs and smoke. She hums to herself, a low tune her mother taught her, as she scoops a small handful of fine, cold ash from beneath the fireplace and sifts it through her fingers. This is her toothpaste. Not toothpaste in any modern sense, of course, but in Maud's world, where remedies are born from what's at hand, ash mixed with a pinch of salt is as good as any imported powder. She dips a linen cloth into the mixture and rubs it across her molars with practiced care. The grit stings slightly, especially at the gum line, but she welcomes the burn. It means it's working, she whispers to her youngest daughter, who watches with equal parts awe and horror. Unlike the pomp of noble hygiene, peasant tooth care is grounded in practicality and folk memory. There are no velvet pouches or perfumed rinses here. Just tradition, passed from one woman to the next, rooted in the rhythm of home and hearth. It begins with salt. Universally accessible and slightly abrasive, Salt is used not only to scrub, but also to pull out evil humours. In this world, where science and magic blur like smudged ink, salt isn't just cleansing, it's purifying. Some wives recite protective verses as they apply it, half incantation, half lullaby. By bone and stone, by salt and sun, let rot be gone, my cleansing done. Historians still debate whether such rhymes were purely domestic invention, or drawn from early pagan rites, preserved in secret long after Christianization. Either way, their use is widespread, and their cadence seeps into daily life like steam through straw walls. Next comes soot. While charcoal gets the aristocratic seal of approval, soot is the working woman's version. Free, plentiful, and shockingly effective. Maud scrapes it from the iron pot's underside, mixes it with crushed fennel seeds, and stores it in a cracked pottery jar. She believes it not only polishes, but smothers the tooth devils, as she calls the pain of decay. And when someone has a tooth fire, the local term for a swollen, aching jaw, Maud reaches for her remedy tin. Inside, a blend of dried chamomile, wood ash, and beeswax. She softens it near the hearth, moulds it into a warm ball, and presses it gently to the aching cheek. Whether it works or not, no one dares question her. She once cured the baker's wife of a terrible rot after all. That rot, by the way, is no small fear in this world. While peasants may consume less sugar, their diets are tough, their tools crude, and their lives rough. Teeth chip on hard barley bread. Gums recede from scurvy. Infection sets in with alarming speed. There are no surgeons here. No monks with their fragrant powders. Just Maud and the wisdom of her foremothers. Quirky, fringe remedies abound. Some swear by ground eggshell mixed with honey. Others crush sage and onion, blend it with ale, and swish it before bed, to drive out the night spirits. One old shepherd even claims that rubbing your teeth with sheep's wool prevents cavities. He still has most of his teeth, so no one argues. And then there's the ritual of sharing. Tooth care in this village is not a private thing. Women gather on wash days to share recipes and grievances. They sit on low stools beside the river, scrubbing linen with one hand and gossiping with the other. If someone has a new toothache blend, she brings it. If someone's child lost a molar, she tells the tale in a sing-song voice. He dropped it into the well, you know, told me the frog asked for it, said he'd give him a new one made of stone. The women laugh, but someone quietly mutters a blessing. Tooth spirits are nothing to joke about. In fact, oral superstition runs deep. Children are told to bury their fallen baby teeth under the doorstep. So the fae don't take your voice. Some tuck them under stones at crossroads. Others throw them into the fire while chanting old rhymes, hoping to avoid crooked adult teeth. Crooked in fire, not in face. Leave me whole in growing grace. These rituals vary from region to region, but their purpose is the same: to protect, to heal, and to remind the child that even small parts of their body hold power. Back in Maud's hut, her husband grunts awake, rubbing his jaw. Another sore tooth. She sighs and pours a bit of warmed ale into a wooden cup, adds sage and yarrow, and hands it to him with a firm nod. He sips, grimaces, and leans back into the straw. If the pain continues, she'll pack the tooth with clove paste, made from the precious little pouch she keeps locked in the cupboard. Imported, gifted by a travelling merchant whose wife she once cured of a stomach curse. It smells like mystery and costs more than her cow. Clove paste is a last resort. For the really stubborn aches, some turn to more dramatic methods. Hot irons, bone needles, even biting on a live eel to shock the devil out. The eel doesn't always survive. The tooth sometimes doesn't either. And when all else fails, the village blacksmith steps in. Yes, the blacksmith. The one who shoes horses and sharpens scythes. He also owns the only pliers strong enough to yank a molar, It's done quickly, sometimes with ale, sometimes with nothing. The patient is held down. The tooth comes out. Everyone prays the rot doesn't spread. Still, even this harsh system has its place in the rhythm of life. The day after a successful extraction, the tooth is often wrapped in linen and buried beneath the hearth, a peace offering to the house spirits, asking for continued health. If the patient recovers well, Maud is paid with eggs or onions. If not, she receives suspicious glances. Yet for all the hardship, there's community here, resilience, a strange sort of pride. These women, with their ash buckets and herb bundles, their rhymes and whispered blessings, hold generations of oral care in their hands. They don't need silver mirrors or perfumed pastes. They have soot and fire and grit and stories, always stories. Like the tale of the miller's daughter who swore brushing with nettles gave her stronger teeth, or the legend of the woodsman whose teeth never rotted because he chewed on iron filings every morning. No one can confirm whether he actually had iron teeth, but the idea stuck. Or the midwife who used to say, "The cleaner the teeth, the easier the birth." No one really believed her, but no one wanted to risk it either. Evening gives way to night. In the glow of dying embers, Maud cleans the last of the ash from her fingers and kisses her daughter goodnight. "Don't forget your rinse," she says, handing over a cup of cooled tea made from fennel and mint. The child sips it dutifully, then spits into the fire with a theatrical hiss. "Did you hear it, Mama, the hiss?" Maud smiles. Means it worked. And tomorrow they'll do it all again. Because in this little village, where medicine is mixed in the same bowl as supper, and wisdom rides on the backs of herbal smoke and soot, tooth care is not a luxury, it's survival. The sound of hammers echoes down the narrow stone alleys of a bustling market town. It's early morning, and the blacksmith is already at work, sweat streaking soot down his temples as he beats a red-hot horseshoe into submission. Sparks fly, dogs bark, and above it all comes the occasional, unmistakable scream, short, high-pitched, and unmistakably human. Tooth-pulling day. In the farthest stall of the smithy, next to the buckets of nails and wagon axles, a man named Garrow leans back in a crooked chair with his mouth open like a frog in distress. A massive man with forearms like cured hams presses a grimy pair of metal tongs against Garrow's lower jaw and, after a quick prayer and a not-so-quick swig of ale, yanks. Garrow howls. The town butcher winces from across the square. And just like that, another infected molar is added to the growing pile of medieval dental casualties. This is not a specialist job. There are no dentists here. No white coats, no Novocaine, no reclining chairs. There are blacksmiths, barbers, and the occasional jack-of-all-trades with strong arms and questionable ethics. If they own pliers and a stomach for blood, they're qualified. In towns across Europe, the blacksmith often doubles as the village extractor, not because he has medical training, but because he owns the strongest tools. Pincers, forceps, tongs. They're made to shape iron, but work well enough on teeth. He may even heat them first, to sterilize them, or just to cauterize the wound mid-pull. Because nothing says surgical precision, like applying the logic of blacksmithing to your mouth. There's no appointment, no waiting room. You show up, point at the swollen part of your jaw, and pray he's in a good mood. Or at least not drunk. Now, let's talk about barbers. They aren't just for haircuts in the medieval period. They're the all-purpose body guys. Bloodletting, wound stitching, blister lancing, and yes, tooth removal. They go by the cheerful name barber surgeons, and their red and white poles are symbols not just of cuts and clippers, but of blood and bandages. Inside one such barber's shop, a narrow room smelling of iron and old vinegar, a patient sits trembling in a high-backed chair. The barber, sleeves rolled to the elbows, sharpens a hook-shaped tool with loving care. He does not comfort his patient. He simply murmurs, "Bite on this," and slides a wooden peg between the man's teeth. Moments later, there's a twist, a crunch, and a gasp. The barber drops the offending molar into a small tin bowl, wipes his hands on a cloth, and asks, "Next?" These extractions are brutal, but they're not rare. Toothaches are constant companions for many, and once a tooth rots beyond repair, removal is the only answer. But here's the twist. Not all early dental interventions are about removing teeth. Sometimes it's about filling them. That's right, medieval fillings. Historians still argue whether true fillings existed in this era, or whether they were simply makeshift patches. But records suggest that in certain regions, particularly parts of Italy and Islamic Spain, healers used mixtures of crushed herbs, beeswax, and even metals like tin or lead to fill cavities. The logic? If a hole is causing pain, plug it. Whether this actually helped or just delayed the inevitable is still up for debate. One infamous case details a man whose tooth was packed with lead and who later died, possibly from poisoning, possibly from something entirely unrelated, like moonstruck fever or wind imbalance. Medical records were not exactly precise. Some barbers even experimented with early dentures. Yes, false teeth, often made from the teeth of the dead. Grave robbing, a little. Economical, very. The teeth would be boiled, scraped, and affixed to a rudimentary plate made of ivory, wood, or bone. These dentures weren't used for chewing. They were for show. You popped them in before a feast, smiled handsomely, and avoided apples like the plague. It wasn't just professionals doing the pulling, though. In rural towns and larger households, sometimes the patriarch, or matriarch, depending on temperament, took matters into their own hands. A sturdy length of thread tied to a tooth and a slamming door was one method. The other, a firm grip and a twist. Let us take a moment of appreciation for the poor souls who went through that. In cities, street tooth drawers offer their services during fairs and public markets. They set up colourful tents, wear flamboyant coats, and shout promises. No more pain, one pull, one coin. It's a show. They drum up crowds, pull a few teeth, wave the bloody spoils in the air, and bow theatrically. Occasionally, they also pass out. These dental street performers operate with more charisma than competence. Some have no training at all. One man reportedly fainted at the sight of blood mid-extraction, leaving his patient passed out and bleeding while onlookers clapped, assuming it was all part of the act. Art and agony, hand in hand. Now, for the truly fringe side of medieval mouth care. There are cases, documented in both medical texts and scandalous gossip scrolls, of people having their teeth filed, not for hygiene, but for fashion. Certain warriors and nobles believed sharp or pointed teeth enhanced their fierceness, so they used stones or metal rasps to shape them into jagged points. Imagine your molars looking like shark teeth. Intimidating, absolutely. Useful for chewing, less so. The results were often catastrophic. Broken enamel, infected roots, and in extreme cases, total tooth loss. But for some, the pain was worth the aesthetic. Fashion hurts, right? On the opposite end of the spectrum were those who dyed their teeth. In parts of Asia, and, through trade, occasionally in Europe, some elite women stained their teeth black. It was a mark of sophistication. It said, "I'm so wealthy, I don't need to appear youthful." In Japan, this practice, ohaguro, was codified. But in European courts, when it showed up, it was mostly whispered about with a mix of fascination and judgment. Closer to home, a more common decorative flourish, gold. While not widespread, there are reports of the wealthiest nobles having small gold caps placed over front teeth. Not for function, but for display. These are early bling. They announce status. They sparkle at feasts. And they hurt like the devil to wear. Then, there are the mouth rinses. Barbers and blacksmiths didn't just pull and patch. They prescribed. Some favoured rinses made of vinegar and alum. Others used boiled sage water with a dash of salt. A few rogue practitioners recommended gargling with your own urine, believing it purified the gums. Note, please don't try this at home. Many of these mouthwashes burned. Some worked, most didn't. But the desire was always the same, to avoid the pain of infection, the embarrassment of bad breath, and the threat of rot. Despite the crude tools and brutal methods, there's a strange kind of community in this pain. Tooth loss becomes a shared experience. A rite of passage. Children brag about loose teeth. Adults compare scars and missing molars. Toothless grins are common, not shameful. An old man in the village pub, known for his gap-toothed chuckle, toasts his friends every Friday with a cup of ale and a chorus of, "Here's to the ones we've lost." No one's quite sure if he means friends or teeth. Maybe both. One travelling bard tells stories of a warrior so fearsome, his enemies fled at the sound of his laughter. Not because it was terrifying, but because he'd lost all his teeth and sounded like a wheezing kettle. The crowd always roars with laughter. They know that pain. They've lived it. And so, despite the agony, despite the cracked enamel and bloodied cloths, people persist. They innovate. They adapt. They chew with one side of their mouth for years if it means avoiding a pull. They sleep sitting up to ease the throb of an infected jaw. They whisper prayers to Saint Apollonia, clutch cloves like talismans, and greet each new ache with resigned bravado, because teeth may fall. But life, after all, goes on. The blacksmith wipes his hands on his apron and drops Garrow's molar into a tin box filled with others. He lights a pipe, exhales, and mutters, "Only 6 today, not bad." Tomorrow, there may be more. But tonight, the forge cools, the barber's clothes shop, and somewhere in the city square, a child proudly shows his gap-toothed smile to the moon, believing, if only for a moment, that he's tougher than the pain. And maybe, in that moment, he is. In a coastal city straddling the boundary of east and west, perhaps Venice, perhaps Constantinople, a ship creaks into port under a saffron sky. It brings silks from China, spices from India, and nestled in a small, locked crate. Powdered coral, dried myrrh, cinnamon bark, and a mysterious greenish resin that smells faintly of heaven and slightly of something medicinal. The crate is unloaded with great care. Its contents are destined not for royalty, but for the shelves of an apothecary where knowledge runs deeper than labels. In the medieval mind, the East is a land of secrets, where medicines hum with magic and every route has a story. Trade caravans crossing the Silk Road and merchants sailing through the Mediterranean bring not only exotic goods, but ideas, and among these, a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of oral hygiene. To the average European, brushing one's teeth with a stick is just an inherited habit. To an Eastern scholar, it is science. Among the most prized items entering Europe from the Islamic world is the miswak, a natural toothbrush fashioned from the Salvadora persica tree. In many parts of the Islamic world, using the miswak is both a hygienic and spiritual practice, endorsed by scholars, and used 5 times a day before prayer. Its soft fibres, antibacterial properties, and naturally pleasant taste make it an object of both reverence and utility. European travellers, particularly merchants and diplomats, encounter the miswak with a mix of curiosity and caution. Some marvel at the cleanliness of their hosts' mouths, others dismiss the practice as strange. But inevitably, the habit creeps westward, slowly, quietly. One Genoese trader, after spending a season in Cairo, returns home with a bundle of miswak twigs tucked into his satchel. He gives them as gifts, demonstrating their use at dinner parties like a parlor trick. "See how the fibers flare," he says, chewing the end and brushing along his molars. His friends laugh until they try it, and find it oddly satisfying. Historians still argue whether the miswak truly influenced European hygiene practices, or whether it remained a novelty item, like the medieval version of an imported health tonic. But evidence suggests some overlap. By the late 13th century, mentions of tooth twigs of Eastern fashion begin appearing in Italian merchant diaries. But the miswak isn't the only treasure arriving from afar. Powdered pearls, once considered a luxury cosmetic, are now marketed as a dental polish. Crushed into a fine white powder and mixed with honey or rosewater, it forms a paste that nobles use to scrub their teeth before feasts. The process is delicate and time-consuming, and more symbolic than effective, but it adds to the growing notion that tooth care is worthy of investment. Then there's ambergris. Yes, the waxy substance that begins its life in the digestive system of a sperm whale and washes ashore like a salty secret. Valued for its scent and rarity, ambergris is used in perfumes and, occasionally, in tooth powders. Apothecaries in cities like Alexandria and Damascus blend it with powdered clove and burnt bone to create an aromatic, numbing mixture said to strengthen the breath and cool the humours of the jaw. Of course, not all imported remedies are so glamorous. Some traders bring stories of a dark red paste made with mercury and honey, used in some eastern regions for both dental pain and ritual purification. When this paste makes its way to Europe, apothecaries tinker with the recipe. The results are mixed. It numbs pain, certainly. It also poisons the user over time. But since long-term consequences aren't well understood, the paste continues to be used in small amounts, particularly by those who can afford neither barber nor blacksmith. And speaking of knowledge, alongside goods, texts flow. Arabic medical treatises arrive in Spain and southern Italy, often translated by Jewish and Christian scholars working in multicultural hubs like Toledo. These texts contain surprisingly detailed descriptions of dental health. One 10th century manuscript, attributed to Al-Zarawi or Abul-Qasis, includes illustrations of tools for tooth extraction, cleaning, and even cauterization of the gums. His work, Al-Tasrif, becomes a cornerstone of medieval medical education, even in Christian Europe. Al-Zahrawi recommends toothpicks made from aromatic wood, mouth rinses of vinegar and rosewater, and even polishing pastes for daily use. His approach is practical, systematic, and rooted in observation. For many Western physicians, his writings are a revelation. Slowly, some of these practices are adopted by European scholars and healers, though often filtered through their own frameworks of humoral theory and Christian morality. Still, the seeds of a more intentional approach to oral care are being planted. In the markets of Palermo, Damascus, or Acre, a traveller might encounter stalls filled with jars labelled in looping Arabic script: cinnamon oil, rock salt, dried pomegranate skin, sage resin. Some are intended for breath, others for digestion, but many serve both purposes, highlighting the medieval belief that mouth and gut are deeply connected. An Eastern merchant might recommend rinsing the mouth with a mixture of saffron, vinegar, and honey water to temper the fire of the belly and sweeten the voice. A scholar might add a pinch of crushed cardamom for freshness. Even street performers chew bits of fennel or licorice root between acts to keep their breath pleasant for the crowd. In Constantinople, then still straddling its role as a hub between empires, royal physicians experiment with blends of European and Eastern practices. One such mixture includes soot from burnt rosemary, saltpeter, and vinegar infused with myrrh. It is applied with linen and followed by a rinse of chilled mint water. The empress at the time reportedly swore by it and commissioned barrels of mint from Cappadocia. Still, Not all responses to these foreign practices are enthusiastic. Some conservative church leaders express concern over the adoption of Islamic grooming habits, fearing spiritual contamination alongside oral purification. Clean mouth, unclean soul, warns one preacher in 14th century Paris, referencing a nobleman seen using a miswak. His words don't stop the trend, but they shape its image. Exotic, possibly dangerous, but alluring. And therein lies the paradox of medieval trade. The very items that improve daily life, like spices, textiles, and yes, dental remedies, also stir suspicion. Are these objects gifts from a wiser culture, or temptations from a rival faith? The answer depends on who you ask. Meanwhile, on the street, a young scribe named Matteo rinses his mouth with a blend of clove oil and hot water every morning. He learned the recipe from an Armenian merchant and modified it to include crushed thyme. His breath is fresher than anyone in the copyist guild. He's also developed a minor obsession with tooth powders. His current favourite? Burnt pomegranate rind and rock salt. Tastes awful, he says, but the girls like it. Tooth talk is becoming fashionable. In taverns, young men compare rinse recipes the way they compare sword hilts. Women trade sachets of dried herbs for breath, wrapped in embroidered linen. A new word emerges in the slang of the marketplace, smilers, referring to those who adopt Eastern tooth care with pride. And in the apothecary's shop, that crate of imports slowly empties. One by one, customers arrive. A weary soldier with a festering molar, a midwife seeking clove powder for her niece, a cook hoping to rid himself of garlic breath before courting the miller's daughter. They leave with little jars, rolled parchment instructions, and the hope, perhaps naive, that their teeth might last another year. Some succeed, some return, but all participate in something larger, a slow fusion of East and West, of myth and medicine, of function and form. The tooth twig becomes a symbol, not just of cleanliness, but of curiosity. And as caravans wind their way through deserts and ships rock through stormy harbours, somewhere along the line, one idea begins to stick. Maybe a clean mouth isn't just a vanity. Maybe it's a sign of something deeper. The sun slants over the hills of southern France, painting the dirt roads and olive groves in hues of gold and lavender. In a fortified town perched above the Rhone River, a crowd gathers near the gatehouse, watching with a mix of curiosity and quiet unease as a column of knights and weary travellers makes its return. Their cloaks are dusty, their eyes sunburned and shadowed. They carry foreign trinkets, Eastern spices, and something less visible but more potent, new customs. They are crusaders, come home from years in the Holy Land, and while many bear the scars of war and the trauma of siege, they also bring back something gentler, something tucked between battle trophies and relics, tooth-cleaning twigs, rosewater, and the ghost of a cleaner mouth. The First Crusade began nearly 2 centuries earlier, but by the time of the Third and Fourth, returning warriors are more than just soldiers. They're accidental ethnographers, carriers of ideas as well as weapons. They've seen the bustling souks of Damascus, the gardens of Jerusalem, the bathhouses of Aleppo, and though their missions were military, they could not help but notice. The people they encountered had very clean teeth. In many parts of the Islamic world, oral hygiene isn't just a matter of preference, it's a religious duty. The Prophet Muhammad himself recommended the use of the siwak before prayers, meals, and sleep. The tradition is widespread and disciplined. Crusaders, initially skeptical, begin to imitate it, part out of necessity, part out of admiration. Imagine a young French knight named Etienne, whose sword arm is stronger than his sense of smell. One evening, after a hot day in a Levantine garrison, he watches a Saracen guard chewing thoughtfully on a twig, spitting into the dust, and breathing with what seems to be actual freshness. Etienne, out of curiosity, and perhaps jealousy, mimics the motion with a snapped-off branch from a nearby shrub. He gags. The wood is bitter and gives him a rash. The guard laughs, produces a second miswak from his pouch, and offers it. Hesitant, Etienne chews, and is surprised to find it not just tolerable, but soothing. It becomes a ritual, tucked between battle drills and chapel prayers. Historians still argue how widely this adoption spread. Some say it remained limited to the upper classes and more cosmopolitan regions like Sicily or southern Italy. Others suggest it trickled down into broader society over generations, its origins slowly forgotten as the practice normalized. Regardless, returning crusaders do not arrive empty-headed. Along with their stories of martyrdom and miracles, they carry practical lessons. How to rinse the mouth with warm salted water to prevent ulcers. How to hold a twig vertically between the teeth and rotate it slowly. How to blend mint with vinegar for a makeshift mouthwash. Some noblemen even commission Eastern apothecaries to write recipes. They return with scrolls written in Arabic, later translated into Latin by Jewish scholars in Spain. These documents include detailed methods for tooth powders, including ratios, ideal times of day, and even warnings about overuse. Do not scrub until the blood appears more than once per moon. At first, these ideas are viewed with suspicion. Certain priests denounce them as Saracen vanities. Others go further, suggesting that cleaning the mouth is a sin of pride. But gradually, the logic wins out. Clean teeth don't just feel better, they smell better. And in courtly life, where proximity is unavoidable and personal space is mostly conceptual, this matters, especially during feasts. Picture a crusader knight seated at a banquet beside a French noblewoman. He eats sparingly, rinses his mouth discreetly between courses with a wine and rosewater blend, and speaks softly. She leans closer, delighted. "What garden grows your breath?" she asks coyly. He smirks. "A garden east of Eden." A clove is exchanged. A romance begins. Back in the Crusader states, those fragile European kingdoms carved into Middle Eastern soil, hygiene becomes an odd blend of local and foreign custom. Frankish lords adopt Eastern habits. Bathing once a week becomes more common. So does tooth cleaning. These practices are passed to children, scribes, even servants. Over decades, they migrate west with the tide of returning families. And it's not just twigs. Crusaders return with an obsession for rosewater. In the Levant, it's used to rinse the mouth, perfume the breath, and soothe inflamed gums. Apothecaries in Acre prepare mixtures of rosewater and crushed cardamom to treat oral infections. These are adopted eagerly by returning nobles, who now ask their barbers for the Eastern rinse by name. Meanwhile, in trade hubs like Venice and Genoa, merchants seize the opportunity. They import barrels of rosewater, sacks of miswak twigs, and resinous gums like mastic and myrrh. Some of these are sold as Crusaders' Balm or Holy Salts of Antioch. Clever branding for what is essentially imported mouthwash. Fringe remedies also arrive. One popular, if peculiar treatment involves a compress of warm fig pulp and cinnamon bark wrapped in cotton and held against the jaw. It's said to draw out tooth demons through the skin. Another trend includes inhaling vapors of vinegar and thyme, essentially medieval aromatherapy. Whether they work or not is irrelevant. They spread. In northern France, troubadours begin composing songs referencing the sweet breath of Jerusalem. In England, a bishop commissions a Latin translation of a Saracen medical text and is buried with a pouch of Eastern herbs on his chest. In Catalonia, young brides receive gift boxes containing a rosewater vial and a silver tongue scraper, marketed as both romantic and medicinal. Of course, not everyone is thrilled. Some traditionalists scoff at these innovations. If God wanted us to smell like flowers, he would have planted roses in our mouths, grumbles one Parisian priest. But the trend endures. And by the 14th century, the idea that oral cleanliness is desirable, if not necessary, is firmly planted in the European psyche. One curious offshoot of Crusader hygiene is the blending of spiritual and medicinal rituals. Some returning monks insist on rinsing their mouths before prayer, claiming it honors God with a pure vessel of voice. They mix rosewater with holy salt, perform a short chant, and swish. The practice spreads in certain monastic orders, though others reject it as too Eastern. Meanwhile, peasant communities hear garbled versions of these tales. In a Welsh village, a man boasts that a knight once told him you can charm your teeth into obedience by humming while brushing with rosemary twigs. The humming becomes a ritual. Children do it before bed. They believe the melody drives out decay. And why not? In this world of uncertain science and high superstition, the line between medicine and magic is thin as vellum. Even fashion adapts. Elite toothpicks, once plain bone or wood, are now carved in Eastern styles. Spirals, crescents, tulip motifs. Some are tipped with tiny rubies. Tooth cleaning is no longer just practical. It's fashionable, dignified, even seductive. Back in southern France, Etienne, now older and settled, keeps a small rosewood box by his bedside. Inside, a dried miswak, a clove pouch, a cloth scented with myrrh. Every night, he brushes slowly, thoughtfully, the way he was taught in the shadow of Crusader campfires. His children watch. They imitate. One carves a miniature twig for her doll. Another chews mint leaves in secret, pretending he's off to battle. This, perhaps more than anything else, signals a cultural shift. Tooth care has moved from a desperate, pain-driven act to a daily ritual, a moment of control, of dignity. And while the wars of the cross brought horror and upheaval, they also brought, strangely, quietly, a breath of fresh air. Literally. The winding road to Canterbury is quiet in the early light, dew still clinging to the grass, the air filled with birdsong and the distant tolling of bells. Pilgrims shuffle forward, cloaks wrapped tightly against the morning chill, their sandals dusty, their footsteps slow but purposeful. They are here for healing, for penance, for hope, and somewhere among the group, a merchant's wife whispers a story that has the others leaning in, breath held. It's about Saint Margaret of Bonnevaux. She died, the woman says, her voice low, with teeth as white as snow and untouched by time. 40 years in the earth, and still her smile was perfect. There are gasps. Someone crosses themselves. A skeptical miller mutters, "She probably didn't eat barley stew all her life." The merchant's wife glares. "It's a sign," she insists. Her purity, her prayers, they preserved her. They say pilgrims who rub their teeth with oil from her lamp find relief from the rot. And so it begins, the mingling of dental care and divine myth, where the holy and the hygienic become impossible to untangle. Medieval Europe is obsessed with saints, their bones, their miracles, their incorruptible bodies, and teeth, those tiny white relics, hold a strange, specific power. They are visible, personal, and in death, strangely resistant to decay. Or so the stories go. Saint Apollonia is the most famous of them all. A 3rd century martyr, she's said to have had all her teeth shattered or pulled out by persecutors. She refused to renounce her faith and leapt into the flames rather than betray Christ. Her courage is immortalized in paintings, tapestries, and stained glass. But more importantly, she becomes the patron saint of toothaches. Her intercession is sought across Europe. If your jaw throbs, if your molars pulse, if infection festers, you pray to Apollonia. You light a candle in her name, whisper her prayer, and sometimes leave a tiny offering. A carved tooth, a silver pin, a twist of linen knotted like a molar. In some towns, people wear amulets bearing her likeness, tucked inside their shifts, close to the heart. But more than just prayers, miracles are expected. One hunchbacked girl in Germany reportedly touched a statue of Apollonia and lost her toothache within the hour. Another tale tells of a Sicilian monk who bit into an apple and cracked a rotten tooth, only for it to vanish by morning after invoking her name. Historians still argue whether these stories were symbolic or taken literally by the masses. Some say they were metaphors for moral cleansing. Others insist that in a world without anesthesia, the power of belief was real enough to dull pain. The cult of saints extends beyond Apollonia. Local legends spring up like mushrooms after rain. In southern France, there's Saint Berthilde, said to have kissed a leper and cured his gums. In northern Italy, a child saint's skull is displayed with its teeth intact, an object of veneration for pilgrims suffering from jaw pain. Touch the glass, they're told, and think clean thoughts. Even folk saints, unofficial, often uncanonized, earn reputations as dental healers. Take the case of Old Marta, a mystic in the forests of Bohemia. She's never been seen without her veil, but word spreads that her teeth gleam like polished ivory and that she can heal aching gums with a breathy chant and a paste made from butter and soot. People travel days to see her. Some swear by her. Others say she's a charlatan with good lighting. Either way, her line stretches past the trees. These holy figures aren't just revered, they shape behavior. Some pilgrims begin brushing their teeth with special mixtures before visiting shrines, believing it purifies the soul. Others mimic the reported routines of incorrupt saints. One woman scrubs her teeth daily with vinegar and thyme because a nun once claimed Saint Apollonia did so in her youth. Is it true? Doesn't matter. It's aspirational. In monasteries and convents, nuns write down miraculous dental cures alongside spiritual reflections. A 14th century abbess in Cornwall describes a dream in which the Virgin Mary hands her a mint twig and instructs her to clean the mouth, for it is the gateway of truth. She wakes and immediately orders every sister to chew mint after confession. The blend of faith and hygiene intensifies. At some shrines, visitors purchase holy tooth powders made of crushed flowers and powdered stone, blessed by priests and packaged in tiny fabric bundles. These are tied to the wrist or worn on a cord around the neck. Some people sprinkle the powder directly onto their gums before prayer. To keep one's words as clean as one's mouth, says the inscription on one such bundle found in York. Not all reactions are positive, of course. Skeptics abound. Some monks criticize the blending of vanity with piety, warning that too much concern for one's breath leads to pride. Better to suffer the rot in the mouth than to rot the soul, writes one Cistercian scribe. Still, the stories persist, and they influence behavior. A young shepherd might avoid garlic before a pilgrimage, hoping to make a better impression on the divine. A widow might wash her mouth with rose water and whisper a prayer, believing it prepares her voice to speak with angels. Even children get caught up in it, asking for saint water to rinse with before bedtime. In London, a curious practice emerges in certain parishes, the blessing of teeth. Each spring, families bring their children to the local chapel for a special service where a priest, draped in white and gold, recites a short prayer and dabs the child's mouth with oil. Some say it ensures straight growth. Others think it wards off disease. Everyone agrees it's worth a try. And then there's the bones. Relics of saints' jaws and teeth are highly prized. They're housed in ornate reliquaries, paraded through towns, and kissed by the faithful. Some relics are authenticated. Others are more dubious. But whether they belong to a saint or a sailor, their power is unquestioned by those who believe. In Prague, a church claims to hold the molar of Saint Clement. Pilgrims touch it through a silver grate, pressing their own aching jaws against the cool metal in hope. In Spain, a monastery offers tiny slivers of saintly enamel, crushed and mixed into wine for sacramental strength. It's expensive, controversial, and always sold out. Meanwhile, oral folklore flourishes. Some rural villages believe that a saint's blessing can prevent tooth loss entirely. In parts of Ireland, children sleep with a scrap of linen embroidered with a cross under their pillow the night they lose their first tooth. If the tooth fairy doesn't visit, she's not common yet, St. Bridget might. Others write little notes and tuck them into cracks in church walls. Petitions for healthy gums, strong molars, or an end to abscesses. One surviving note from a 13th century chapel in Bavaria reads, "Dear Holy One, my breath is foul and my jaw burns. Grant me peace, or at least a night without pain. Your servant Hilda." Whether or not Hilda's prayer was answered, we'll never know. But it speaks to the desperation and the hope that medieval people poured into their beliefs. Because for all the rituals, all the herbs and tools, toothache remains a kind of silent plague. Invisible, persistent, humiliating. And when nothing else works, when the ash and salt and clove have failed, people turn to the divine. Not just for healing, but for meaning. A farmer with a rotten molar might believe it's punishment for lying. A nun with receding gums may fear she's losing her voice of prayer. A pilgrim who suffers for days but is cured suddenly on the steps of a shrine sees not coincidence, but miracle. Even skeptics admit, sometimes belief eases pain better than medicine, and so the stories grow. Saints who smile in death, miracles whispered through incense, children whose teeth glow in the dark for a night and are never troubled again. By modern standards, it all sounds fanciful, but in an age of candlelight and bloodletting, where suffering is daily and comfort rare, the idea that someone, somewhere, might intercede to soothe your pain is powerful. It keeps people praying. It keeps them hoping. And sometimes, that hope is enough. So the pilgrims keep walking, toward Canterbury, toward Rome, toward any place with a chapel and a whisper of healing. And in their packs, alongside bread crusts and holy cards, many carry a small pouch of mint, a twig, or a vial of oil. Because saints may work miracles, but it never hurts to come prepared. The stars blink above a sleepy Saxon village, and the wind whistles through wooden shutters, stirring dried herbs hung from ceiling beams. Inside a crooked little cottage with walls patched in mud and horsehair, a boy writhes in bed, clutching his cheek. His mother paces with a bowl of garlic mash. His grandmother mutters a charm into a length of red yarn. His father, finally fed up, grabs a candle and reaches for the leech jar. Welcome to the realm of medieval folk dentistry, where no theory is too strange, no creature too slimy, and no charm too absurd, especially when the molars start throbbing. For much of the Middle Ages, the dominant theory of tooth pain isn't rooted in bacteria or sugar, but in worms. Yes, worms. Tiny, invisible, squirming creatures that live inside your teeth and gnaw from the inside out. It sounds bizarre, but it was a deeply held belief across many cultures, from Scandinavia to the Middle East. Some suspected the worms entered the mouth through bad food or cold air. Others believed they were born inside the tooth itself, nestled like demonic larvae in the pulp. To explain the sensation of pressure, sharp stabs, or the muffled throb of infection, people conjured up images of these toothworms twitching in irritation or feasting hungrily on bone. And, understandably, they wanted them gone. Toothworm extraction became an entire subcategory of folk medicine. One method involved heating a metal pin until it glowed, inserting it briefly into a clove of garlic, and then placing the clove into the aching tooth. The theory: the worm would be lured out by the heat and garlic fumes and escape. If the patient felt a sudden burst of pain or saw blackened discharge, they believed the worm had fled. Some healers used smoke. a mixture of henbane, mandrake and myrrh, was burned in a small clay pot. The patient, mouth agape over the funnel, was told to inhale the smoke and chant, "By fire and leaf, be gone, ye gnawing beast." When the pain lessened, or when the patient passed out, the worm was presumed dead. Historians still argue whether the worm belief was symbolic, representing infection, or whether people literally believed in tiny creatures drilling through enamel. Whatever the case, the image was potent. It appears in medieval poems, carvings, and even marginalia in illuminated manuscripts. A knight jousting a worm-shaped creature inside a giant tooth, a woman crying as a worm slithers from her open mouth. But if worms explain the why, medieval folk medicine had plenty of options for the how, as in how to fix it. Take charms. Toothache charms were among the most common magical remedies in medieval Europe. Some were spoken aloud while touching the painful area. "Worm and wind, be still this night," by St. John's Tooth and candlelight. Others were written on parchment and worn around the neck. One Anglo-Saxon charm involved carving the words Angkor, Angkor, Abath, Amen onto a scrap of wood and tying it with twine over the sore jaw. The charm was thought to confuse the worm or lull it to sleep. It wasn't uncommon for sufferers to sleep in odd positions or near iron nails to pin the spirit in place. Then there were leeches. Now, to be fair, leeches were medical mainstays, used for everything from headaches to fevers. In tooth care, their application was more creative than effective. Some healers believed that placing a leech on the cheek or under the tongue could draw the pain to the surface and release it. Others, less gently, applied the leech directly to the gums, hoping it would suck out the spoiled blood surrounding the worm. The sensation, by all accounts, was awful. But for some, the relief was real, likely due to the mild anesthetic effect of leech saliva. Fringe practitioners had even wilder ideas. One 13th century manuscript from Central Europe recommends spitting 3 times into a black dog's mouth while standing on one foot, facing east, and reciting a psalm backward. "The pain shall flee with the beast," it claims. Elsewhere, in the Carpathian Mountains, it's said that tying a frog's leg around the neck, alive or dried, would pull the ache from the tooth into the limb. Once the pain stopped, the frog leg was buried near a running stream, so the river may carry away the demon. And then there's the moon. Lunar cycles played a vital role in folk dental lore. People believed that certain phases of the moon increased the risk of toothache, particularly full moons during Lent or harvest. In some calendars, farmers marked no-tooth days, dates when pulling or treating a tooth was forbidden, lest it bring plague or madness. One particularly unlucky young man in Brittany reportedly ignored the no-tooth day, had a molar yanked by a travelling barber, and developed a fever that night. He survived, but the local priest blamed it on lunar arrogance. For years after, children were warned, "Pull not under the wolf moon, or howl you shall." Despite all the oddities, not all folk remedies were ill-conceived. Many herbal treatments actually had merit. Willow bark, used in poultices or chewed directly, contains salicin, a compound related to modern aspirin. Clove, with its natural anesthetic eugenol, numbs pain and reduces inflammation. Yarrow, mint, chamomile, each offer gentle relief when brewed as rinses or chewed raw. And then there's sage. Used in teas, pastes, and even as a simple chewing herb, sage was believed to cool the blood and cleanse the voice. One German housewife swore by a concoction of crushed sage and goat's milk applied with a feather. Her entire family reportedly escaped dental infection through 2 consecutive winters. A local miracle. To this day, archaeologists unearthing village graveyards often find teeth remarkably intact in some populations. particularly among those with high herb diets and low sugar intake. It's a quiet testament to the fact that, sometimes, grandmother really did know best. Still, when infections set in, options narrowed. If the worm refused to die, if the charm failed, and if the leeches just left bite marks, someone would call in the tooth woman. Every region had one. She might be a healer, a midwife, a retired cook. She carried a basket of tools, brass needles, jars of paste, a file, a cloth soaked in vinegar. Her hands were quick, her voice firm. She'd examine the mouth, ask a few questions, then lean close and whisper something to the aching tooth. What she whispered, no one knew. But more often than not, the pain dulled, or at least the patient believed it had. Psychosomatic, perhaps. But in a world where pain lives in the shadows and science is just a rumour, belief can be half the cure. One such woman, Agnes of Elmsford, became famous in her region. Mothers brought their crying children for her soot and clove salve. Farmers lined up with bee-stung jaws. She claimed to have cured a merchant's rotten molar by binding it with a thread spun under a new moon. When he died of unrelated causes, she was blamed anyway. Her cottage was burned, but her recipes survived, written in chalk behind a stone hearth. That's how it went with folk medicine. Fleeting, fluid, often feared. And yet, these remedies formed the bulk of daily life for most of the population. The common folk didn't have gold scrapers or apothecaries. They had hens, garlic, and conviction. And perhaps, for all its wild theories and worm hunting, that conviction was the most potent tool of all. Because when the wind howled and the molars throbbed, when sleep was thin and fever brewed behind the eyes, people reached not for what was proven, but for what was remembered, what was whispered, what was passed down by firelight. And somewhere in the dark, as a mother gently ties red thread around her son's wrist and hums a charm older than the church itself, the pain finally, blessedly, eases, just a little. A bell tolls low over the rooftops of a bustling medieval city, its sound muffled by fog, damp with the scent of smoke, sweat and something sour lurking beneath. It's the 14th century now, and everything smells different, sharper, denser. The streets are narrower, the air heavier. And whether you're a baker, a blacksmith, or a bishop, there's one scent you cannot escape. Plague. It creeps like a shadow under doorways and settles into the folds of cloaks. The people fear it more than fire, more than famine. And with it comes a new urgency, an obsession even, with the mouth. Because when death travels in breath, people begin to notice their own. In this age of pestilence and panic, dental hygiene takes a strange and sudden leap. Not because people suddenly understand bacteria, but because they're desperate to mask what they believe is the smell of death. Theories abound. Some physicians blame miasmas, foul airs believed to rise from corrupted earth and unclean bodies. Others suggest that illness is transmitted through proximity to decaying matter, or even by one's own rotten teeth. The plague, after all, strikes hardest in those with blackened gums and swollen cheeks. And so, into this world of superstition and survival comes a wave of perfumed solutions. Enter tooth waters. These fragrant concoctions, sold by apothecaries and street vendors alike, become all the rage. They are part cosmetic, part medicine, and entirely unscientific, but they smell divine. A typical toothwater recipe might include rosewater cinnamon bark, clove oil spirit of wine, highly alcoholic, a pinch of saltpeter, and if you're feeling adventurous, a shaving of licorice root or a splash of distilled vinegar. Mixed together and swished in the mouth, it gives a burning, fragrant rush that makes the user feel temporarily invincible, and at the very least, slightly less repulsive. Some rinse, some gargle, The more daring dab it behind their ears or soak a cloth to hold in front of the nose as they walk through plague-ridden streets. A few even drink it, believing the burning means it's killing something inside. Spoiler, it probably is. Mostly their stomach lining. Historians still argue whether these early toothwaters were actual precursors to modern mouthwash or simply glorified perfumes. What's clear is this: people believed in their power, and belief, in the face of death, is half the battle. Let's visit an apothecary. The shop is dim, cluttered, and humming with quiet commerce. Shelves are stacked with jars of dried lavender, candied ginger, and twigs tied in neat bundles. In the corner, a copper still bubbles gently. A small sign reads, "For the breath of mercy." A merchant leans in, whispering, "Something for the mouth, sweet, strong. The kind that makes a priest forget your sins." The apothecary nods, uncorks a glass vial, and lets the merchant inhale. He recoils, sneezes, then nods approvingly. That'll do. The most prized toothwaters are those with imported ingredients. Clove from India, nutmeg from the Moluccas, mastic resin from Chios. These are luxury items, flaunted by nobles and clergy alike. A bishop in Avignon is said to have a servant whose sole job is to prepare his morning tooth rinse, lemon balm, white wine, and powdered pearl. Peasants, of course, improvise. They boil mint leaves with ale, strain it through a linen sock, and add a pinch of salt. The result is bracing, bitter, and barely effective, but it's something. And in a world where even the breath is suspect, something is better than nothing. Breath becomes a social marker. Good breath implies cleanliness, godliness, and wealth. Bad breath becomes both a moral and medical indictment. A woman might be denied courtship over halitosis. A monk might fast not just for piety, but to avoid onion stink during Vespers. Some brothels even begin requiring breath cleansing before visits. Chewing cloves, rinsing with wine, or simply washing the mouth with ash and mint. A few progressive guilds start to include oral hygiene in their codes. The Apothecaries Guild of Bologna, for instance, mandates that all members know how to prepare at least 3 tooth-cleaning tinctures. One includes sage, rosemary, and fennel boiled in sheep's milk. Another calls for powdered seashells and vinegar. And in Florence, a city teetering on the edge of plague and rebirth, early distillation techniques emerge, not just for perfume, but for hygiene. Distilled herbal waters, especially mint, thyme, and rosemary, are used as both internal tonics and mouthwashes. A document from 1382 lists a water for foul breath and sorrowed teeth, given by a physician to a prominent merchant's wife. But toothwaters are just one front in the war against plague breath. Perfumed pouches, pomanders, become essential accessories. These are metal or wooden balls, often ornately carved, filled with scented herbs. Some are worn on chains, others dangle from belts. A few are placed directly into the mouth during prayer, allowing the user to breathe sweetly unto God. The irony, of course, is that most of these remedies do little to prevent infection. They mask symptoms, offer temporary relief, and, if they burn enough, give the illusion of efficacy. But the underlying problems remain: poor diets, untreated decay, and no knowledge of bacteria. And yet, among the fear, some strange advances emerge. A few physicians begin to record patterns. People with cleaner mouths seem to recover faster from minor infections. One Florentine doctor notes that patients who regularly rinse with vinegar water survive fevers slightly more often. He starts prescribing a daily rinse to his entire household, and soon others follow suit. Quirky new beliefs arise. One pamphlet claims that brushing the teeth with crushed mint at dawn prevents the inward rot. Another insists that singing while rinsing strengthens the lungs. A fringe movement in northern France believes that reciting the Lord's Prayer backward while chewing parsley will ward off both demons and decay. And then there are the superstitions. A mother in Rouen teaches her daughter to hold a rosemary sprig between her teeth during thunderstorms to protect against sudden dental pain. In Hungary, some villagers light small fires in their hearths and whisper prayers to burn the worm of death that lives in the breath. Even children's rhymes evolve. Plague in the mouth, plague in the air, swish with rosewater and say a prayer. If the saint likes your smile, you'll live through the night. But if he smells rot, then say your good night. Charming. Religious leaders also get involved. Some monasteries begin distributing holy tooth powder on the feast days, a mix of blessed salt, dried mint and charcoal. Pilgrims carry these in tiny pouches, dipping fingers before meals. A bishop in Burgundy claims it wards off unclean spirits that enter through the tongue. Whether metaphor or literal demon, it catches on. Meanwhile, artists begin depicting holy figures with perfect smiles. Statues of Mary show teeth like polished ivory. Saint Apollonia appears with tiny brushes or herbal wreaths. In churches, stained glass windows show angels rinsing their mouths in radiant bowls of golden water. It's aspirational, it's allegorical, but it's also deeply personal. Because in the age of plague, your mouth becomes more than your own. It's a vessel, a gate, a risk. And so, people brush, rinse, gargle, pray, chew cloves until their gums are raw, swish wine and vinegar until their throats burn. They trade recipes, they swap powders, they experiment, hoping for a little more time, a little less pain, and maybe, just maybe, a kiss that doesn't make someone recoil. And as night falls over the city and the bell tolls again, this time for a soul departed, a widow dips her cloth in a basin of lavender water, rubs her teeth with a scrap of sage, and sits by the window, whispering prayers. Not just for health, but for hope. Because even in the face of plague, a clean breath can feel like a small act of rebellion. A way of saying, I'm still here. I still matter. I still care. And sometimes, that's all a person has left. As dawn spills over the tiled rooftops of Cordoba, golden light draping its famed courtyards and whispering through the arches of the Mesquita, a different kind of morning ritual unfolds. In the quiet alcove of a scholar's study, a man dips his hands into a basin of cool water. He rinses his mouth 3 times, then gently passes a slender twig between his teeth. It's not for show, or even comfort. It's devotion. It's cleanliness. It's law. In both the Jewish and Islamic worlds of the medieval era, oral hygiene isn't a mystery or a luxury. It's a sacred act, and it's remarkably advanced. While much of Christian Europe stumbles between superstition and scattered innovation, the faithful of Islam and Judaism establish routines centuries ahead of their time. Tooth care becomes ritual, symbol, and science, woven into prayer, law, and daily life. Let's begin in the Islamic world. From the 7th century onward, the use of the miswak, a tooth-cleaning twig made from the Salvadora persica tree, is not just encouraged, it is sunnah, a practice followed by the Prophet Muhammad. He is said to have used the miswak before prayer, before sleeping, upon waking, before entering his home, and during ablution, wudu, the ritual cleansing required before worship. It's not a quirky aside, it's woven into faith. The hadith literature, collections of sayings and actions of the Prophet, contains numerous references to oral hygiene. Were it not a hardship for my community, one saying goes, I would have commanded them to use the miswak before every prayer. That's 5 times a day, every day. Think about that. This near constant cleansing doesn't stem from modern germ theory, but from an understanding of bodily and spiritual purity that's astonishingly detailed. Clean breath honors the words of the Quran. clean mouths speak truth. The mouth, they believe, is not a source of shame, but a gateway to the divine. And the miswak itself is a marvel. Soft, fraying fibres, gently scrub teeth, and massage gums. It contains natural antiseptics and fluoride-like properties, though medieval scholars didn't use such words. They spoke instead of harmony, of balance between body and soul. The miswak is praised not only by theologians, but also by physicians. In Andalusia, the jewel of Islamic Spain, scholars like Ibn Zur and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, write treatises on oral care. Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine, translated into Latin and studied for centuries, recommends cleaning the teeth not just for health, but to sharpen the intellect and improve speech. Tooth powders are common, mixtures of dried herbs, ground shells, charcoal, and even aromatic resins like mastic or frankincense. Recipes vary by region, but are based on experimentation and observation. One such powder contains crushed walnut bark, dried rose petals, sea salt, powdered pumice stone, clove oil for fragrance and numbing effect. Mixed with water or applied dry with cloth or twig, it is as close to modern toothpaste as the medieval world gets, and it's surprisingly effective. Elsewhere, mouthwashes abound. They are called madmada in Arabic, often herbal infusions of thyme, vinegar, mint, or even date wine, though opinions vary on its permissibility. Some are boiled and cooled, others are sun-steeped. They are used after meals, before prayer, or during illness. What makes this system unique is not just its sophistication, but its consistency. Unlike in Christian Europe, where dental care is hit or miss depending on class or local belief, in Islamic lands, it's normalized, expected, internalized. And while not all Muslims follow these routines strictly, the expectation means that even the common merchant, shepherd, or student probably brushes more regularly than a European noble. This tradition crosses into trade. Caravans from the Islamic world carry miswak bundles to Africa, India, and even as far north as Italy. In the ports of Sicily and Malta, Christian sailors occasionally pick up the habit. In places where cultures blend, like Andalusia, shared practices emerge. Even Christian lords start using Saracen twigs after dinner. Historians still argue how much influence these habits had on European dental practices, but the evidence is there: travel accounts from crusaders, translated medical texts, and even sketches of miswak in monastic margins labelled tooth wand of the East. Now turn your gaze to the Jewish world. Here too, dental care is a matter of ritual, though framed differently. In Judaism, cleanliness is part of tahara, the state of purity required before prayer, Torah study, and sacred acts. The Talmud, an extensive body of Jewish law and commentary, includes discussions of tooth care. One passage from Berakot mentions rinsing the mouth in the morning as part of preparation for prayer. It's a detail, yes, but one rich with meaning. Because in Jewish law, the body is not shameful or distant from the sacred. It is the vessel through which holiness is performed. Keeping it clean, including the teeth, is an act of respect for life itself. Among medieval Jewish communities, particularly in Spain, Italy, and the Middle East, oral hygiene practices mirror the sophistication of their Muslim neighbours. Chewing herbs is common, mint, parsley, and myrtle being favourites. Toothpicks made of silver or wood are used after meals, especially on the Sabbath. It's customary for families to keep small cloths or brushes for mouth cleansing. One 12th century responsa, a rabbinical legal response, allows the use of toothpicks on holy days, provided they don't cause bleeding. This implies not only widespread usage, but nuanced regulation. Jewish physicians write detailed guides for maintaining oral health. Maimonides, philosopher, doctor, and one of the great minds of the 12th century, emphasizes regular brushing, light eating, and proper chewing to preserve both the teeth and digestion. He recommends gentle herbal rinses and even warns against grinding teeth while sleeping, something modern dentists call bruxism. In Jewish mystical tradition, the mouth also holds power. Words build the world. Prayers shape the cosmos. The cleanliness of the mouth reflects the clarity of the soul. Certain Kabbalistic practices even include reciting psalms while cleaning one's mouth, transforming it into a sacred act, a daily renewal. And like their Muslim counterparts, Jewish communities trade in hygiene goods. A miswak might be adapted into a local variant, olive or pomegranate twig. A tooth powder prepared by a Moorish apothecary is sold in a Jewish quarter, repackaged with a different blessing. The ideas travel, the techniques blend, and through it all, the focus remains: purity, presence, precision. This blending isn't without tension. In Christian Europe, where public hygiene is sporadic and theology often downplays bodily care, these practices are exotic, sometimes admired, often criticized. Church authorities worry about moral corruption through Eastern indulgence. Some denounce miswak as Mohammedan affectation. Others dismiss Jewish dental care as superstitious. But beneath the prejudice, fascination simmers. Pilgrims returning from Spain bring back tooth powders and stories. Medical students in Salerno learn Arabic and Hebrew to read treatises. A bishop in Sicily commissions a silver miswak holder, though he calls it a cleansing wand, to avoid scandal. By the late Middle Ages, echoes of Islamic and Jewish dental care appear in Christian texts. One herbal manual translated from Arabic lists cleansing of the teeth as essential before morning prayer. A monk's diary in Toledo records his attempts to make tooth powder from fennel and burnt bread. Not as sweet as the Saracen dust, he writes, but it stings less. And among the common folk, the stigma fades. A farmer in Provence chews a miswak at sunset. A Christian merchant in Naples buys clove rinse from a Jewish vendor. A Moorish widow in Granada teaches her daughter to floss with silk thread soaked in myrrh. The walls between faiths remain, but mouths, it seems, are more open, because no matter the creed, the pain of a toothache is universal, and so is the relief of clean breath. So when the bells ring out in Cordoba and the faithful gather for morning prayer, dozens of hands rise to mouths, rinsing, brushing, preparing. Muslim, Jew, and Christian alike, each in their own language, each with their own tools. But for a moment, unified by the simplest of hopes, to speak without shame, to breathe without pain, to greet the world with a clean mouth and a clear heart. The moon sits low and fat above the heathered hills of northern England, casting a pale sheen over stone cottages and curling chimney smoke. In a cottage nestled between two twisted oaks, a woman named Ethel lays out her tools beside the hearth. Not pliers or powders, but frog bones, thistle root, and a satchel stitched with runes. Her granddaughter, red-cheeked from crying over an aching molar, watches as Ethel whispers to the fire. Tooth pain, in the folk traditions of Europe, is not always a medical matter. It's a magical one. Long before anatomy charts and Latin names, teeth were governed by spirits, stars, and stories. And nowhere is this more vividly alive than in the thick fog of folklore remedies, where fairies meddle, frogs heal, and teeth fall under enchantments both wicked and wondrous. Let's begin with the frogs. A widespread belief in various parts of medieval Europe, especially in England and the Germanic regions, held that frogs had the power to draw out pain. The logic: frogs are creatures of transformation. From tadpoles to hoppers, from land to water, they shift, adapt, absorb. So when pain needs removing, the frog becomes a vessel. One method was simple. Catch a frog, ideally green, though colour debates varied by village, and press it gently against the swollen cheek. The pain was believed to leap into the frog. If the frog croaked or twitched, the cure was working. If the frog died, well, that was the price of healing. Some went further. The tooth frog charm involved wrapping a dried frog leg in red cloth and wearing it around the neck, close to the jaw. In some regions, people buried a frog under the front doorstep after a successful cure, as a thank you and a warning to future spirits. Stay out of this house. Historians still argue whether these practices were symbolic rituals or genuinely believed physical cures. Most likely, they were both. In a world where the line between real and enchanted is as thin as a cobweb, belief and medicine blur easily. But it wasn't just frogs. Teeth and fairies have an ancient, tangled history. In Celtic lands, it was believed that children's teeth held power, their purity, their connection to life's first cries and words. When a child lost a tooth, it had to be disposed of properly. Tossing it into a fire was safest, burning away its magical potential. Some buried it under hearthstones or ancient trees, returning it to the earth. Others fed it to animals, preferably a cat or a bird, so that the child's adult teeth would grow strong and sharp. But if you lost a tooth and didn't deal with it, the fairies might take it, and once they had a piece of you, they could find you in dreams, or worse, replace you. Some mothers hung charms, tiny pouches of milk teeth tied with rosemary and yarrow, to protect against changelings. A child who lost too many teeth too early might be suspect. And a child who grew crooked teeth. Whispered rumours of fey curses fluttered in the air like moths. In Brittany, a belief persisted that placing a child's tooth in the mouth of a weasel would pass on sharpness and swiftness of tongue. The practice was rare for obvious reasons, but it highlights the link between teeth and destiny. Tooth lore also extended into romance. Young women were told not to kiss a man missing a front tooth. It meant he was unlucky in love or possibly cursed. Some believed that if a woman whispered her wish into a pulled molar and buried it beneath a rose bush during a new moon, she'd dream of her future husband. Of course, not all tooth spells were so sweet. Curses involving teeth were common in witchcraft accusations. One notorious case in 15th century Bavaria described a woman who kept a jar of extracted teeth and whispered over them at night. She was said to cause jaw swelling in her enemies and make lovers' breath stink with jealousy. Whether true or not, she was burned. Even outside witch trials, teeth had power in folk magic. They were used in divination, slipped into love potions, and carried as protection. Some travellers bit down on a wolf's tooth before crossing dangerous land, believing it warded off bandits and spirits alike. Let's not forget the moon. Ah yes, our old friend. Just as the moon governed tides, crops, and moods, it was believed to rule over teeth. Pulling a tooth under a waning moon was good luck. It meant the pain would leave with the disappearing light. But never pull under a waxing moon, unless you wanted the ache to return stronger. Lunar calendars often included dental notes. Third day, waning gibbous. Fair for plucking molars. Avoid north winds. In some regions, women tracked their menstrual cycles alongside tooth schedules, believing both were influenced by lunar tides. A midwife might advise, don't chew sage under a full moon if you want your wisdom teeth to stay quiet. And yes, that's another superstition. Wisdom teeth weren't just a painful rite of passage. They were signs of hidden knowledge. Losing them too early was feared. Keeping them too long was suspicious. Some old herbalists even claimed that rubbing a bit of mugwort on the gums could delay their arrival. Until your mind's ready for what comes with them. Of course, there were practical remedies hidden among the enchantment. Rubbing the gums with crushed chamomile or sage was both magical and soothing. Chewing fennel was said to make your words clearer, your breath sweeter, and your dreams more vivid. Children were given tiny bundles of thyme and lavender to suck on when teething. to keep the bad spirits from nibbling at the new teeth. One particularly fascinating fringe practice, the tooth offering stone. In some rural parts of Scotland and Wales, families kept a special rock near the hearth or tucked into a garden wall. When someone lost a tooth, child or adult, they pressed it to the stone, whispered a blessing, and either left it there or threw it into a nearby stream. The stone was believed to carry the pain away and return strength in its place. Stories sprang up of stones that glowed slightly when fed with pain, likely lichen or moonlight. But tell that to someone who's just stopped aching. In towns where Christianity and folklore danced a tense waltz, priests sometimes tried to suppress these traditions. One bishop outlawed the burying of teeth among rosemary. Another denounced the singing over the molars as pagan blasphemy. But such declarations rarely stuck. Folk memory is stronger than parchment, and herbs don't read proclamations. And so these rituals continued, quiet, persistent, intimate. A farmer rubs clove into his sore gum, not knowing why it works, only that it was his mother's cure. A shepherdess buries her child's tooth at the edge of the woods, whispering thanks to the moon. A midwife leaves a frog bone on a windowsill and makes tea with mint and sorrow. Not because it's proven, not because it's fashionable, but because these are the stories she trusts. Even today, echoes remain. The tooth under the pillow, the wish on a fallen molar, the uneasy feeling when a dream ends with the loss of teeth. We carry those myths like plaque on the mind, stubborn, invisible, and strangely comforting. And so the fire crackles in Ethel's hearth, the child sniffles and leans back, and the old woman applies her soot and thyme paste, gently humming the tune her grandmother once sang. It's not science, but sometimes it's enough. Because when the night is long and the ache is deep, what matters most is the belief that pain can end, and the story that says how. A tower bell chimes in the centre of Prague. The year is 1483, and the city glows in the last light of the setting sun. Across the square, two men haggle beneath a green awning, a merchant and an alchemist. Their transaction has nothing to do with silk or spices. It involves a glass vial containing a sparkling white powder, labelled in elegant script, Pulvis Dentarius, Formula 9. The merchant leans in, sniffs the contents, and recoils slightly. Smells like burnt eggshells, he mutters. The alchemist smiles, with a note of ground pearl and a whisper of sulphur. To the uninitiated, this might sound like snake oil, but in the growing world of late medieval alchemy, it's a cutting-edge dental preparation, one of many formulas that promise to purify the mouth, strengthen enamel, and even restore lost teeth. Spoiler, it won't. But hope, much like breath after a rinse of vinegar and mint, is intoxicating. By the 15th century, the age of medieval folk medicine is giving way to something more experimental, curious, chaotic, and often hazardous. Alchemists, the intellectual rock stars of their day, don't just hunt for gold from lead or eternal youth. Some turn their fire-stained hands to a more humble but universal pursuit, fixing people's rotting mouths. It starts with powders, crushed coral, pearls, oyster shells, even bone. These are ground into dust mixed with fragrant herbs and sold as whitening agents. They are to be rubbed directly onto the teeth with cloth, a finger, or the blunt end of a feather quill. The result? A cleaner-looking smile. Yes, but also serious enamel damage over time. A popular 15th century recipe from Florence lists the following: powdered deer antler, burnt alum ground sage, a few drops of aged wine, rose oil for the humours. The result is a pleasant-smelling, gritty paste. It polishes, it perfumes, it stings a little. Users rave about the initial shine. They complain later about teeth softening like cheese. But by then, they've moved on to something more dramatic: Elixirs. Enter the liquid revolution. Tinctures for the mouth explode in popularity, particularly in cities like Venice, Paris, and Krakow. Some promise to eliminate toothworms, others to brighten the smile like moonlight on polished silver. Most contain vinegar, spirit of wine, distilled alcohol, and a secret blend of herbs. Some are harmless, others not so much. Let's talk about mercury, used widely in alchemical preparations for its supposed purifying properties. Mercury occasionally finds its way into early dental elixirs. Just a few drops, diluted with vinegar and myrrh, were believed to kill the invisible worms inside a decayed tooth. And kill it did, though often with side effects. Users reported dizziness, tremors, and blackened gums. One merchant in Nuremberg went blind in one eye after using a silver essence rinse daily for a month. When the town physician dissected his mouth post-mortem, he found corroded jawbone and mercury deposits in the cheek. Still, the trend didn't fade. If anything, it spread. Historians still debate whether this era marked the dawn of real dentistry, or just a gilded age of misguided experimentation. The truth is likely both. For every dangerous elixir, there were discoveries that bordered on brilliance. One German apothecary, for instance, developed a paste using powdered horseradish and honey that surprisingly eased gum swelling and reduced bleeding. Another Venetian scholar discovered that boiled fennel seeds steeped in brandy could freshen the breath for hours and reduce mild pain. But as always, the line between healing and harm is thin. And nowhere is that more evident than in the art of filing. Inspired by Eastern practices and classical Roman texts, some Renaissance alchemists begin filing teeth for alignment. They believe that by reshaping overlapping or gapped teeth, they can restore balance to the mouth, and thus to the body's humours. The tools: tiny rasps, bone scrapers, even glass shards wrapped in cloth. The pain? Exquisite. The outcome? Sometimes improved alignment, sometimes irreversible damage, always stories to tell. One ambitious noblewoman in Milan had her canines filed into dainty points, then painted with a pearlescent glaze. She claimed it made her look more angelic. Her servants claimed it made her look perpetually hungry. Either way, the idea of cosmetic enhancement had arrived, and it was here to stay. Tooth dyes also make their debut. While most aim for white, some outliers embrace the dramatic. One Florentine banker, known for his theatrical flair, dyes his teeth black with crushed walnut husk and vinegar, claiming it gives him the mystery of a Moorish prince. He is ridiculed publicly, admired secretly, and copied widely by bored aristocrats. Then there are the internal elixirs, drinks meant to nourish the bones of the face. These often include boiled cowbone broth, ground fig seed, ox bile, dried orange peel, and occasionally gold dust for those who could afford it. They're consumed once a week, preferably under a waning moon, and are said to anchor the teeth in the jaw. No proof, but plenty of anecdotes. The most famous being that of Lord Alban of Bruges, who reportedly kept every one of his teeth until age 71, despite a fondness for candied lemons and jewels. His secret? 3 sips a week of elixir argentum and no kisses after sundown. Quirky, yes, but effective? Possibly. Still, some concoctions cross the line from eccentric to apocalyptic. A 1492 London recipe lists snake venom, dried batwing, and powdered gold leaf, blended in warm ale. It was to be swished but not swallowed. The idea? Venom, in small doses, was thought to draw out impurities. The actual result was oral paralysis and, in one tragic case, death. And yet, alchemists remain trusted, even revered. They wear black robes, speak in riddles, and produce glowing jars of promise. Their shops smell like incense and fear. People line up for their wares, exchanging coin for hope. Because behind every shimmering vial is a whisper. Maybe this is the cure. Maybe this powder, this potion, this elixir will finally end the pain that stalks so many mouths. In time, some alchemists begin to specialize. They call themselves tooth menders, a term distinct from barber surgeons. They focus not on yanking teeth, but on preserving them. They create new implements, scrapers, rinsers, tiny spoons for applying paste. Some keep journals, sketching tooth diagrams and noting outcomes. These records, many of which survive, offer tantalizing glimpses of early dental science. And while many formulas fade into obscurity, some live on. Rosewater rinses, clove oil infusions, tooth powders with charcoal and mint, all rooted in this era of curious, chaotic experimentation. One popular alchemist's book from 1499 ends with this advice: treat the mouth as you would the altar, clean, fragrant, and fed not with scraps, but with the art of devotion. It's poetic, possibly dangerous, entirely medieval. By the dawn of the 16th century, the alchemist's influence begins to wane. True medical science is rising. Universities start banning mercury tinctures. Church authorities clamp down on tooth sorcery. But the legacy of these strange dental potions endures. In cupboards, in notebooks, in whispered recipes passed from apothecary to apprentice, and in the back rooms of dusty cities, where candles flicker over mortars and pestles, someone still stirs a pot of bone ash and mint, hoping, believing that maybe this one will work better than the last. Because when the ache returns, and it always does, people will drink anything, try anything, risk anything to silence it. And sometimes, amid the alchemy and ambition, they stumble on something that actually helps. Not gold, not immortality, just a little relief. And in a world of bleeding gums and secret grins, that's treasure enough. The halls of the Louvre echo with murmured conversation and the tap of soft leather shoes. Inside the portrait gallery, candlelight dances on oil-painted faces, kings, queens, and courtiers immortalized in velvet and ermine. Their eyes glisten, their shoulders gleam, but their mouths, closed, tight-lipped, pressed with grace and restraint. Not because they're shy, because their teeth are long gone. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, Europe's elite are undergoing a shift. Gone are the days of rustic powders and herb sellers hawking tooth elixirs in market stalls. This is the Renaissance, the age of grandeur, of optics, of image. And nothing ruins a painting or a marriage proposal quite like a blackened molar. The irony is biting, literally. For all their riches, monarchs and aristocrats suffer from some of the worst dental health of the era. The culprit: sugar. By now, sugar isn't just a luxury, it's a lifestyle. Imported from the New World and filtered through Venetian merchants and Portuguese sea captains, sugar flows into Europe like gold dust. It's exotic, exciting, and ruinous. Nobles stir it into tea, pack it into pastries, and suck it in candied fruits all day long. The result? Smiles collapse. Historians still argue whether royals understood sugar's impact on teeth, but contemporary documents hint at suspicion. A 16th century Venetian physician writes that the noble palate has grown soft with sweetness, and the noble jaw has begun to crack. Another laments that no courtier past 30 smiles without consequence. Still, the addiction persists. In England, Queen Elizabeth I becomes infamous for her sweet tooth. She adores candied violets, sugar plums, and pastes of quince boiled in syrup until they shine like rubies. The Queen's teeth, it's said, grow black with decay. Foreign ambassadors whisper about her gummy mouth and speculate about how many teeth remain. She rarely smiles. When she does, it's behind a lace fan. To compensate, royals turn to deception. Toothless or decaying mouths are painted over in portraits. Artists are instructed to give the illusion of youth, rosy cheeks, soft lighting, and always a closed mouth. Smiling in portraits is rare not for reasons of etiquette, but because teeth, frankly, are unsightly. Behind palace walls, courtly grooming becomes more elaborate. Servants are tasked with polishing their master's remaining teeth using cloths soaked in white wine and sage. Toothpicks made of ivory, gold, or silver become status symbols. They're worn as jewelry, hanging from chains, tucked into velvet sleeves, or even hidden in rings with secret compartments. Yes, you read that right. Toothpick rings. Popular among Italian nobility, these fashionable accessories allowed wearers to clean their teeth discreetly in public, sliding open a tiny panel to reveal a pointed pick or small scraper. It wasn't just hygiene, it was style. Tooth care is now inseparable from image, and nowhere is this more evident than in the rise of foreign grooming tools. Wealthy families import toothbrushes from the East, especially from China, where bristle brushes have been in use for centuries. These early brushes feature handles of bone or ivory, and bristles made from boar hair. They're rare, expensive, and seen as exotic novelties. But slowly, they gain traction among the fashionable elite. Queen Catherine de' Medici reportedly kept a set of 3, one for clove oil, one for vinegar, and one for a mysterious blend of fennel and honey. She never used them in public, but she insisted they travel with her, stored in a silk-wrapped case stitched with her monogram. French courtiers begin to mimic this routine, commissioning their own brushes, often inlaid with enamel or gemstones. They are never left lying about. They are too precious and private. Like undergarments, they are items of intimacy and status. Still, brushing is not yet widespread. The dominant method of cleaning remains the cloth and powder approach. But even this has evolved. Recipes grow increasingly elaborate. Some include powdered rubies for vibrational brilliance. Others mix fine porcelain dust with orange peel and cinnamon. It's skincare for the mouth, a form of oral vanity that straddles the line between medicine and cosmetics. Meanwhile, new fears emerge. The Renaissance is not only an age of rebirth, it's an age of scrutiny. People are more aware of anatomy, beauty, and the fragility of health. Court physicians begin writing about the aesthetics of breath. A foul mouth, they argue, is not just impolite, it's a sign of inner corruption. Breath becomes a form of moral judgment. To protect themselves, nobles adopt breath rituals. They chew cardamom after meals. They rinse with rose vinegar before meetings. Some even develop a habit of perfuming their mouths. Tiny glass bottles filled with clove oil or sweet myrrh hang from belts or bodices. Before speaking, they dab a drop onto the tongue or rub it along the gums. More eccentric remedies appear. A Bavarian duchess swears by brushing with powdered glass and salt. A Spanish marquess uses a cloth dipped in lemon juice and crushed emerald. A Hungarian count, obsessed with longevity, drinks goat milk infused with mint every morning and gurgles opera notes to vibrate impurities loose. Is any of it effective? Questionable, but it's consistent. And unlike the erratic efforts of earlier centuries, these rituals are now routine. Tooth care is no longer just a reaction to pain, it's a daily defense against disgrace. Still, decay wins more battles than it loses, and so the question becomes, what to do with a noble who no longer has teeth? The answer, cover it up. False teeth make their European debut, primitive, awkward, and expensive. Crafted from wood, ivory, or the teeth of animals, and sometimes humans, these early dentures are often carved to fit the wearer's jaw. They are tied in with wires, glued with resin, or simply balanced carefully for short appearances. One French noblewoman is said to have worn a full upper row of teeth carved from whalebone, fixed with gold thread. They looked magnificent, until she sneezed and they launched into her soup. That didn't stop others from trying. By the end of the 1500s, full and partial dentures become common among the aging elite. They're uncomfortable, prone to slipping, and nearly impossible to eat with. But they restore dignity, and in a world obsessed with appearances, that's enough. Portraiture too adapts. Painters learn to soften mouth lines, hide facial asymmetries, and hint at smiles without exposing teeth. Mouths are idealized. Breath is invisible. Teeth become the hidden shame of beauty, a truth painted over with oil and artistry. In some courts, teeth become a subject of gossip. The Duke of Aragon's breath wilts roses, one lady writes. He chews cloves with such desperation that his voice smells like Christmas wine. Another courtier jokes that the Queen's newest lover speaks in whispers, lest his molars confess their sins. Even poets get in on it. A satirical verse from Florence reads, "He smiles like a candle, all wax, no flame, for teeth he has none but a dentist's name." Yet behind the mockery, there's envy, because for all their toothaches and cosmetic trickery, these nobles are trying. They are pushing forward, adopting foreign tools, refining old recipes, and, above all, refusing to give up on their mouths. And in doing so, they lay the groundwork for what's to come. The professionalization of dental care is still a century away, but in these silent smiles and scented breath sprays, in the toothbrushes lined with boar bristles, and the portraits with closed lips, we see the beginnings of modern dental aesthetics. So when you next admire a painting of a Tudor monarch, consider what lies beneath that demure expression. A mouthful of rot, a gleaming ivory denture, a trace of clove oil on the breath? You'll never know. And that's exactly how they wanted it. The year is 1599, and the streets of London smell like smoke, horses, and anticipation. Queen Elizabeth is still alive. Barely. Shakespeare's Hamlet is drawing packed houses, and merchants flood the Thames docks with spices, tobacco, and printed books. It's the edge of something new. Not quite modern, but certainly not medieval. And somewhere in this teeming city, a barber sets out his tools on a linen-draped table, iron forceps, a silver tongue scraper, a bottle of rosewater, a pot of charcoal powder, and, tucked carefully into a leather case, a single bristle toothbrush. Yes, a toothbrush. It's not common, not yet. But the seeds of modern dental care are finally breaking through the mulch of centuries. Tooth care is no longer just ritual or folklore, saintly imitation, or alchemist's gamble. It's becoming a craft, a discipline, a profession. But as we approach this threshold, it's worth pausing, not to leap ahead, but to trace the winding, cobbled path that led here. Because despite the new tools and emerging science, the shadow of the medieval world still clings to people's mouths like old plaque. Let's start with the shift. The printing press, now a century old, has transformed the way knowledge spreads. Recipes, once scrawled on parchment and whispered in smoky kitchens, are now printed in books, with indexed chapters and woodcut diagrams. One 1592 English health manual includes a full page dedicated to the care of the teeth and the sweetness of the breath. It recommends brushing morn and ean with a twig or bristle, with salt and burnt rosemary, and rinsing the mouth with white wine wherein sage hath steeped. It's a leap forward, yes, but not a revolution. These manuals are read by the literate elite, who still rely on servants to prepare their tooth powders and herbal rinses. In the countryside, Maud's great-granddaughter still rubs ash on her molars. In village markets, tooth drawers still ply their trade with tongs and tankards of ale. But things are stirring. Enter the specialist. By the end of the 16th century, a new breed of practitioner begins to appear. Not quite barber, not quite physician. They call themselves operators for the teeth, or dentatores. They advertise their services in broadsheets and by word of mouth. Some even claim royal patronage. Their pitch, not just extractions but prevention. They offer scalings, where the tartar is scraped from teeth with hooked instruments. They offer coloured powders for whitening, some of which include lead or alum, unfortunately. And in the most daring cases, they offer transplants. Yes, transplants. In Paris and London, a handful of operators begin experimenting with taking teeth from the poor, or the dead, and implanting them into the mouths of wealthy clients. The results are, unsurprisingly, horrific. Most teeth fall out or rot within weeks. Infections are common. Rumours swirl of grave teeth that curse the wearer. The practice fades, but not before planting a seed. Teeth can be replaced, modified, controlled. Even the theatre gets involved. Actors use fake teeth crafted from ivory or wood to play older characters. Some use mouth paints, staining the lips, whitening the teeth, darkening the gums, to enhance expression. One actor is said to have developed a technique of biting lemon peel backstage to clear his breath before soliloquies. Cosmetic concern, once the province of queens and counts, is now trickling down into the middle class. A prosperous merchant might own a toothbrush carved from bone. A wealthy widow might apply tooth powder nightly, just before her maid braids her hair and turns out the lamp. And speaking of toothbrushes, let's take a closer look. The modern-style toothbrush, as we know it, likely originated in China, made with hog bristles set into bone or bamboo handles. European versions begin to appear in the late 16th century, though rarely. Most people still use cloth, fingers, or chewed twigs. But the idea of a dedicated tool for cleaning teeth, that's new. That's different. One English nobleman writes in his diary, "I have commissioned from a Venetian merchant a device most curious, with bristles fastened by wax to a handle of ivory. It is said to scrub the teeth most finely, though the taste is of pig. Delightful. Toothbrushes remain a luxury for now. But they're a signpost, one of many, marking the slow creep of dental care from mystical ritual to bodily habit. And yet, even in this moment of progress, the old world refuses to vanish. Saint Apollonia still hangs in households. Her image is pressed into coins, stitched into cushions, painted in miniature on lockets. When a pain strikes, people still whisper her name. In rural France, a farmer places a candle at her feet before submitting to a tooth pull. In Poland, a bride buries a loose tooth at the church gate, hoping for strength in her marriage. In folklore, the tooth fairy is beginning to peek her head into stories. Not yet the coin-bearer of modern childhood, but a shadowy spirit who trades teeth for dreams or grants a wish if you bury a molar under the threshold. The line between blessing and spell remains blurred. And then there are the tools. Oh, the tools. Tiny pliers with twisted handles, scrapers shaped like shepherd's crooks, picks with sharpened bone tips, tongue depressors, jaw clamps, gum probes. They're ornate, unsettling, and increasingly standardized. A traveling operator might carry a velvet-lined case filled with metal instruments that click and gleam in candlelight. It's part medicine, part performance. There are manuals too. The 1598 De Dentibus Humani Corporis, on the teeth of the human body, printed in Antwerp, is one of the first books to depict the human dental arch in accurate proportion. It describes enamel, dentin, and gum disease. It warns against certain powders and praises the virtues of clean linen and mint water. It is, in many ways, the beginning of dentistry as science. But that science exists beside the old ways. In the same year, a Scottish midwife records a tooth charm in her journal. a rhyme to be spoken over warm milk before bed, meant to ease teething pain. Said thrice, in rhythm with the rocking chair. She swears it worked for her first 5 children. By the 6th, she adds clove, and then there's tobacco. Newly imported, widely praised and smoked by the fashionable, it becomes both remedy and villain. Some claim it strengthens the gums. Others say it dries the mouth and hastens rot. But already, mouths are beginning to darken with its mark. So what does all this mean? It means that as the Middle Ages fade, teeth have not yet entered the age of enlightenment. But they're no longer trapped in the age of myth. People are thinking about their mouths not just when they hurt, but when they eat, speak, kiss, or sing. And more importantly, they're beginning to act on those thoughts. An English merchant writes, "I brush now by candle, that my breath may greet my clerk without offence. It is not vanity, but mercy." A German baron notes, "My wife has taught our children to rinse with vinegar after meats. They smell like salad, but smile like angels." These are not grand declarations, but they're habits, rituals, seeds of modernity, and they echo across centuries. Because while science and surgery will one day take over, the medieval spirit lingers in bedtime routines, in herbal teas, in the way we touch our jaws when they ache and instinctively search for a clove. And maybe, on some quiet night, as we brush under a bathroom light and spit into porcelain instead of ash, we'll remember, somewhere, 1,000 years ago, a monk was doing the same thing. Not perfectly, not hygienically, but faithfully, hopefully, with a twig, a prayer, and a little luck. Because even when nothing else made sense, cleaning your teeth, however crudely, was a way of saying, I'm still here, I still care, and I'm not giving up yet. And now the candles dim. The torches flicker out along stone corridors. The smell of herbs, sage, mint, clove, lingers like a lullaby in the air. The tools are folded away, the remedies corked, the prayers whispered. The long, strange journey through medieval mouths draws to a close. You've walked beside peasants and nobles, monks and merchants, alchemists and mothers. You've heard charms spoken under the breath, watched powdered coral swirled into honey, and seen saints smile from stone tombs with teeth untouched by time. And in all those moments, across continents and centuries, you've witnessed something tender. Not just the ache of tooth pain, but the effort to stop it. You've seen that even in the darkest corners of history, people tried. They tried to feel better, look better, love better. They rinsed with wine, scraped with twigs, burned frog bones, and hummed under the moonlight. All for the small, stubborn hope that tomorrow might hurt a little less. And maybe that's what bedtime history really is. A soft uncovering of the odd, the true, the human. So tonight, as you close your eyes and drift deeper, carry that with you. The quiet resilience of those who came before. The woman by the fire, crushing sage leaves. The knight brushing his teeth with rose water before a duel. The child burying a molar beneath the doorstep, dreaming of fairies. Their world was different, but their mouths, aching, laughing, whispering, weren't so different from yours. Good night, traveller. Sweet dreams.